Counsel, can I ask you about the remedy and sort of the way that I was talking with the SG? I mean, it makes perfect sense for the individual doctors to seek an exemption, but as I understand it, they already have that. And so what they're asking for here is that in order to prevent them from possibly ever having to do these kinds of procedures, everyone else should be prevented from getting access to this medication. So why isn't that plainly overbroad scope of the remedy the end of this case?
So with respect to the premise of that question, Justice Jackson, I don't think our doctors necessarily are able to object for two reasons. One of this is the emergency nature of these procedures. As the FDA acknowledges, many women do go to the emergency room. And if we just think about what that might look like, take Dr. Francis. She's on the labor and delivery floor supervising.
I'm sorry, I don't want to hypothesize. Tell me in her declaration where she talks about not being able to object or pose a conscientious objection.
She talks about, Your Honor, being
I mean, can you point me to any place in the declarations where a declarant states that they attempted to object but were unable to?
No, Your Honor, for two reasons. One, these are emergency situations. Respondent doctors don't necessarily know until they scrub into that operating room whether this may or may not be abortion drug harm. It could be a miscarriage, it could be an ectopic pregnancy, or it could be an elective abortion, Your Honor. In addition, the government simply cannot get its story straight on EMTALA. If you look at the district court brief in that case, we just heard that the Church Amendment applies, and while we would love for this court to adopt that position, they told the district court the very opposite.
All right, let me ask you this. If we were to find that there are conscientious objections that, say, hospitals take them into account and these doctors do have a way to not do these kinds of procedures, should we end this case on that basis?
No, Your Honor. We would welcome that holding, but it's not broad enough to remedy our doctors' harm.
Why?
Because these are emergency situations, they can't waste precious moments scrubbing in.
No. I'm saying assuming we have a world in which they can actually lodge the objections that you say that they have. My question is, isn't that enough to remedy their issue? Do we have to also entertain your argument that no one else in the world can have this drug, or no one else in America should have this drug in order to protect your clients?
So again, Your Honor, it's not possible given the emergency nature of these situations.
Counsel, let me interrupt there. I'm sorry. I think Justice Jackson's saying, let's spot you all that, okay, with respect to your clients. Normally, in Article 3, traditional equitable remedies, we issue, and we say over and over again, provide a remedy sufficient to address the plaintiff's asserted injuries and go no further. We have before us a handful of individuals who have asserted a conscience objection. Normally, we would allow equitable relief to address them. Recently, I think what Justice Jackson's alluding to, we've had, one might call it a rash of universal injunctions or vacatures. And this case seems like a prime example of turning what could be a small lawsuit into a nationwide legislative assembly on an FDA rule or any other federal government action. Thoughts?
Yes, Your Honor. Again, I have to say that I think it's impracticable to raise a conscience objection, but even spotting that, I think the district court remedy here was perfectly appropriate under Section 705. Section 705 grants the reviewing courts the authority to issue all necessary and appropriate relief. And as the government acknowledged in oral argument in Corner Post, when the parties before the court are non-regulated parties, the only avenue in which they can possibly get relief, and of course that's sort of the sine qua non of equitable relief, is that the parties before the court get it. And that's for, as in this case, a state issue, or in other cases, a vacature. And that's because without that sort of relief, the very parties before the court won't get it.
I think why can't the court specify that this relief runs to precisely the parties before the court, as opposed to looking to the agency in general and saying, agency, you can't do this anywhere?
So I think, Your Honor, that might be impracticable. If we're thinking again about the emergency room situation, would Dr. Francis again have to know when she's in the emergency room whether this is a miscarriage, an ectopic pregnancy, or an elective abortion? This is what she does day in and day out. And so it seems like to say that these would run two particular plaintiffs would be missing, that the FDA regulations would still be in place and permit things like mail order abortions. They would have removed the reporting requirements. And if we look at the merits of what FDA did in 2021, FDA relied on two things. They relied first on the FAERS data.
Counsel, before you pivot back to the merits, and I can understand your impulse there, but I went back and looked, and there are exactly 0 universal injunctions that were issued during Franklin Delano Roosevelt's 12 years in office, pretty consequential ones. And over the last 4 years or so, the number is something like 60, and maybe more than that. And they're a relatively new thing. And you're asking us to extend and pursue this relatively new remedial course, which this court has never adopted itself. Lower courts have kind of run with this. And I just want to give you one more shot at that.
Sure, Your Honor. So again, the APA, of course, encapsulates equitable remedies. And as Pomeroy and others have said from the beginning of the 19th century, equity requires that the parties before the court get relief. In this instance, again, as the government pointed out in Corner Post, where you have non-regulated parties, those parties could be farmers, they could be ranchers, they could be the seed farms in Gertsen. But their only availability for relief is if the court does something to the FDA order or regulation at issue. Otherwise, those parties are simply out of luck, and that's inconsistent with equity.